So we're just gonna let folks file in to the Zoom over the next few seconds. Hello, everybody at home. Thanks for joining us. We're live here with Shane Martinez, David Mivasair, Karen Rodman, Yves Engler, Khaled Mouammar for our event Subsidizing Apartheid, how the Canadian Revenue Agency contributes to Palestinian dispossession. We'll be starting very shortly. I can see lots of you coming through. This is very exciting. We'll be starting shortly. We're also live on the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute's Facebook page. The link is posted in the chat. So please check that out, facebook.com/Canada Policy. And we'll be starting in a few seconds. Hello to everyone at home. Hello to everyone on Facebook. Hi to everyone in Zoom. It's great to see you here. It's great to see so many people coming through. And we'll be starting very shortly. All right, so I think the numbers are starting to stabilize and we can begin this evening's event. I just want to say a big hello to everybody. We have a terrific lineup of speakers and it's sure to be a terrific evening. I'm so happy to be hosting this critical discussion, Subsidizing Apartheid, how the Canadian Revenue Agency, or CRA, contributes to Palestinian dispossession. So our webinar this evening features Khaled Mouammar, Rabbi David Mivasair, lawyer Shane Martinez, Yves Engler, and Karen Rodman. Please be sure to look in the link for chats to the organizations, to information, and to actions that you can take. Bianca Ho, our superstar volunteer with the CFPI, will be posting lots of links, and so will Karen Rodman from Just Peace Advocates, so please look out for those. My name is Bianca Mivasair, and I'm with the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, which is one of the organizers of today's event. And we want to offer thanks to our co-presenting organizations, the Palestinian Canadian Congress, PAJU, and Just Peace Advocates. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that many of us are on Indigenous land. I myself am speaking to you from the island of Montreal, or Jojage, which is situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka people and keepers of the eastern door of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. So as I mentioned earlier, we're live streaming to Facebook on the Foreign Policy's Facebook channel as well. Please do share that link with your friends who might want to join in. And we'd love to hear from you. The chat is open. Please say hi. Let us know where you're tuning in from. As always, keep your comments civil, be cordial, and be free from racist or sexist or otherwise harmful commentary. And we also will be opening up to a Q&A a little bit later. Hello, Robert. Hi, Kumal. Hello, Elaine. Great to see you. And so if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, you can put them in the Q&A. That's at the bottom of the screen. And we'll take those. We'll get to as many as we can, time permitting. So again, my name is Bianca Mivasair. I'm with the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, and it's an organization that challenges unjust foreign policy measures, and it aims to bridge the gap between the perception and reality of Canada's role in the world. And we also work to oppose the racism that we believe is embedded in Canadian foreign policy. So you can find out more about us at foreignpolicy.ca. We're working towards a progressive foreign policy, towards the internationalism we all need to embrace so urgently, which we know must include meaningful international solidarity. And that includes support for anti-racist, anti-colonial movements globally. So please check us out. Donate if you're able to at foreignpolicy.ca/donate. So today we're having what is likely the first ever comprehensive discussion that's taken place regarding one of the most important contributions to Canadian contributions to Palestinian dispossession. It's becoming increasingly of concern, increasingly clear that the Canada Revenue Agency grants charitable status to many, many organizations that strengthen what Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, many South African officials, and millions of Palestinians have labeled Israeli apartheid. So before handing off to our esteemed speakers, I just want to offer some very quick technical context for this discussion. What are registered charities? So these are organizations that receive benefits from the Canada Revenue Agency, or CRA, I'll refer to from now on, and they're exempt from paying certain taxes. But more importantly, they can provide tax receipts for donations. So when an individual makes a donation, they can write that off on their taxes. And depending on a person's tax bracket, that can reach, up to 40% of a donation, which is effectively subsidized by taxpayers. So for instance, if a person donates $10,000, they can get upwards of $4,000 removed from their tax bill. At a macro level, if, for instance, $250 million is raised by Canadian charities for Israel each year, that would work out to $75 million in Canadian taxpayer support. So dozens, maybe even as many as 100 registered charities raise funds for Israel. And some of these are, upstanding charities or innocuous charities such as, Symphony or Guide Dog Society. There are other charities that support West Bank settlements, explicitly racist institutions, and even the Israeli military. And the Canadian charity that's received the most critical attention, and will be discussed here today, is the Jewish National Fund. So we'll be hearing a little bit about that. And a number of the speakers participating in today's webinar recently submitted a formal legal complaint to the CRA regarding the charitable status of the Canadian Zionist Cultural Association, which supports the Israeli military in explicit violation of CRA rules. And lastly, it's also worth noting that the battle around tax subsidized charities isn't just happening in Canada. A week ago, 7 Congress people called for ending tax exemption for groups raising funds to support settlements in the West Bank. So this is part of a larger struggle. All right, so now on to our speakers for the evening. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our first panelist of the evening. This is our first panelist of the evening is Khaled Mouammar, Palestinian Canadian refugee who led the Canadian Arab Federation in the 1970s and again between 1980 and 1982, alongside David Mivasair. He has formally submitted a legal complaint to the Canadian Revenue Agency regarding the charitable status of the Canadian Zionist Cultural Association. Welcome, Khaled. I'm gonna see if I can help unmute you. Khaled, you just need to unmute your video. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, so I would like to acknowledge that we are residing on the lands of the First Nations who have suffered what the Palestinians have suffered from the former settler colonial state of Canada. And as a Palestinian refugee, I was born in Haifa in Palestine, but my family comes from Nazareth, which was a predominantly Christian town. And during the hostilities that started, we were living in Haifa close to the railway tracks. And I recall one incident when one of the trains was derailed by bombs placed by the Irgun, because the Irgun and the Stern gangs were placing bombs on that line regularly. And the situation was becoming serious. I was living at that time with my elder brother and my grandmother in Haifa. My parents were away in West Africa on some business, and they were concerned. So they called my grandmother and told her that she should move us to safety by visiting her sister, who was married to a Lebanese. So we had to cross the border into Lebanon, but the borders were closed. Contrary to the Zionist propaganda, we had to find a way inland, trek across the hills and go and enter the country illegally. And we stayed with my grandmother's sister for a few months. But when it became evident that the situation was getting worse and that the refugees who were expelled or forced to flee were not going to be allowed to return, my parents came from West Africa to Lebanon, and we rented a house in a small village called Brummana. Now, during that period, between 47 and 49, around 750,000 Palestinians were forced to flee or were evicted through massacres, through the destruction of their villages. And those who remained were only 150,000. They were granted Israeli citizenship, but the laws that were passed put them all under military rule, which meant that they could not leave their villages or habitation without a military permit. So many of the Palestinians who were internally displaced could not even return to their villages. As an example, Nazareth was saved because it was a predominantly Christian town, and it wasn't good for the image of Israel to attack and destroy Nazareth, a Christian city. So many of the villagers around Nazareth sought refuge in Nazareth. As an example, the city of Safuria, which is only 6 kilometers away from Nazareth, many of them fled into Nazareth. And currently, a quarter of the population of Nazareth, which is nearly 20,000 from Safuria, cannot return to their lands, even though they are citizens of Israel, because a law was passed in 1950 called the Absentee Property Law, which basically said, if you're away from your property for 6 months, the state can expropriate it. And since all these people who had sought refuge in Nazareth were not allowed under military rule to move and visit their village, they lost all their property. And they sit, some of them, because Nazareth overlooks Safuria, it's on a higher mountain, and they point to their children and grandchildren, this is where we came from, but we cannot go back there because the state has taken it. So that is what Zionism stands for, ethnic cleansing, to ensure that there is always a Jewish majority so that laws can be passed which grant superior rights to Jewish citizens. And this is why these laws are in place, where immigrants can come from any place in the world. Any Jew or convert to Judaism can move into Israel, become a citizen, and yet I cannot return simply because I am a Christian, I'm not a Jew. So during this period of military rule, which lasted until December 66, which is 6 months before the 67 war, 940 Jewish settlements have been built in Israel, but not a single Palestinian community settlement has been built, even though now they comprise 20% of the population living on only 3% of the land, because the state reserves the land only for Jews, and their plan was to Judaize the Galilee, and now they are focusing on Judaizing the Negev, which has Bedouin Palestinians. 100,000 of them have been moved into shanty towns forcefully, but another 100,000 refused to move, and they live in 35 villages, and they are denied basic services like the electricity, water, picking up of garbage, schools. But these people refuse to leave their lands because they know that they will lose land on which they have been living for centuries. So the same policy is now being followed in East Jerusalem, because East Jerusalem, after the annexation of the city in 1980, the Palestinians now comprise 38% of the population of the United City of Jerusalem. However, they don't have the status of citizens, they only have residency status, which means it can be revoked at any time for any flimsy reason, because the plan again is to Judaize Jerusalem, to make it predominantly Jewish, and to corner the Palestinians into enclaves with little land as possible. And the same policy is being followed in Area C in the West Bank. So this is how Zionism has been able to maintain this apartheid system, using laws by the majority and using military force, because the military is there with the mission of protecting the Jewish colonists that move into these expropriated lands, and they commit vandalism and threaten the Palestinians who live there. And the military are even protecting them and supporting them. And so apartheid is really the result of an ideology which believes in supremacy of Jews, and to accomplish that, they use the majority in the Knesset to pass laws, discriminatory laws against non-Jews, immigration laws, creation of communities, all of those things. So, however, the Palestinians are resisting because they have learned, like I have relatives in Nazareth, and they tell me, we visited the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and we know what they're doing there, because they did the same thing to us, the Palestinian citizens of Israel, who are discriminated against. They cannot move into Jewish communities without an admissions committee that will really determine if they are culturally suitable and if they can assimilate in that society. One example, people who had moved to a Jewish community, and which has now about 20% Arabs, were trying to create a school there, but the mayor said, no, in this city, in this town, we will only allow Jewish schools. They said, okay, in that case, pay us for busing our students to an Arab town. They said, no, we won't pay you, because the nation state law says this country should be a Jewish state. The laws should be to protect Jews. The laws should be to propagate and promote Jewish culture, Jewish language, all of those things. So we are confident, though, even with all these things, the events of May have shown that the Palestinians across all of Palestine are united now, because they know they are facing the same apartheid system. They were fragmented into Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, Palestinians of East Jerusalem who have residency, Palestinians in the West Bank who have nothing, and Palestinians in Gaza who live in a concentration camp. But they know that all of them face the same this systemic discrimination and attempt at ethnic cleansing, dispossession, and expropriation.
I think Khaled has frozen.
And they are committed to it. Yeah, Erwin Kotler can go back there and become a citizen, but I cannot. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Khaled, for just sharing those incredibly important details, for giving us that critical overview and history, and for sharing your personal experience and story. And I look very forward to hearing more from you in the Q&A a little bit later on. So people, if you have questions, please do put them in the Q&A. Our next speaker of the evening is Shane Martinez. Shane is a Toronto barrister and solicitor and founder of Martinez Law. Shane regularly writes and lectures about police brutality, racial profiling, the prison industrial complex, and transnational labor. Shane also serves as the Deputy Legal Director at LIUNA Local 3000, where he helps defend the rights of Ontario's frontline healthcare workers, among many other roles that Shane plays. So Shane is the principal author and lawyer in the legal challenge to the CRA regarding the charitable status of the Canadian Zionist Cultural Association. Welcome, Shane.
Thanks very much, Bianca. It's a privilege to be included on this panel. So thank you to you and all the other organizers as well for inviting me to speak on such an important topic. I suppose, as you noted, I'll be speaking briefly on the subject matter that's underlying a recent complaint filed by Khaled and David. And I'll note at the onset that although we've conducted extensive research with respect to the subject matter of the complaint prior to filing it, the complaint is still awaiting investigation by the Canada Revenue Agency. So just to be clear, in other words, the allegations raised in the complaint have not yet been substantiated by the CRA itself. The investigation is ongoing. So the complaint relates to the Canadian Zionist Cultural Association, which, as you noted, is a registered charity in Canada. It's governed by the provisions of the Income Tax Act. And as a charity, it's subject to oversight by the Canada Revenue Agency. And the complaint in question really sets out 4 grounds for the complainant's belief that the CZCA was not operating in compliance with Canadian law and the CRA's policies. In essence, the complaint alleges that money flowed directly or indirectly from the CZCA to the IDF or to entities and projects that benefited the IDF. Significant research and support for the complaint was actually provided by Al-Haq, which is an independent Palestinian non-governmental human rights organization based in Ramallah. Al-Haq has been around since 1979, and they work towards protecting and promoting human rights and the rule of law in the occupied Palestinian territory. Now, Canadian law and CRA policy require that charitable organizations maintain control over how their funds are used. This is an accountability feature that ensures that charitable donations are being used appropriately. In addition to that, Canadian law and CRA policy also requires that charitable organizations not be conduits for other organizations. This is a transparency feature to ensure that funds donated toward a particular organization remain within it, and that the organization not simply act as a funnel to send money to a non-charitable cause. The complaint that was filed by Khaled and David alleged that the CZCA co-hosted fundraisers with another group, which is not a charity. That group is known as the Association for the Soldiers of Israel Canada, also known as ASI Canada. And the 2 groups appear to share an office, they appear to share staff and other resources. Even their logos appear remarkably similar. So they had quite a bit in common, although one was a charity and one is not. Now, advertisements for the events that they would put on showed that the events would be held in honor of the IDF or in honor of IDF soldiers and their families. The events would feature Israeli military officials as guest speakers. They would come into Canada to address these events. And people could make charitable donations as well to the CZCA or non-charitable donations to ASI Canada in categories ranging from hundreds of dollars to tens of thousands of dollars, and the high tens of thousands of dollars for some of the categories. We're talking $50,000, $70,000 or more. So these were different categories in which people could make donations at these events. Now, in documents available from the CRA, what was observed is that in recent years, the CZCA has used increasingly large amounts of money for the benefit of an Israel-based group known as Jihad. In 2019, it actually provided over $1.7 million to the benefit of Jihad. Now, Jihad is led by retired high-ranking Israeli military officials, and it has all of its overhead costs financed by Israel's Ministry of Defense. And Jihad advertises that 100% of all donations are utilized for their objectives without any overhead. The word "there" appears to refer to the Ministry of Defense or IDF. The organization appears to serve as a fundraising hub for IDF soldiers and the IDF itself. Now, although Jihad advertises that it strengthens and cares for Israel soldiers through a number of different initiatives, it also provides important building and infrastructure support for the IDF, including the creation and development of soldiers' clubhouses, gyms, landscaping on bases, and auditoriums on military bases, among other things. The link between the CZCA and the IDF appears to be even closer than that, though. It was observed that on the IDF's own website, it listed the Canadian Zionist Cultural Association as an organization that was authorized to raise donations for it. Those are the words that it used, raise donations, I believe. Now, however, it's our understanding that prior to the complaint being filed, a journalist who was aware of the complaint reached out to the CZCA for comment. And then a very short time later, possibly within 24 hours, the IDF's website was updated to remove any reference to the Canadian Zionist Cultural Association. Now, Canadian law and CRA policy are clear that charitable donations may not be used for the support of a foreign military. And there have been cases in the past involving situations where charitable donations were being used for the benefit of the IDF. And the courts have clearly and consistently held that such activity is not permissible. The complainants in this case believe that a thorough investigation by the CRA's Charity Compliance Division will prove that the allegations are true. And they remain cautiously optimistic as well that the CRA will take appropriate enforcement action if that's the case. So really, in conclusion, it's not simply a concern that money may be sent abroad for the benefit of a military. It's a concern that money may be going to benefit a military that's alleged to be responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Military that's subject to an ongoing investigation by the Office of the Prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, a military that's engaged in not only an illegal occupation in the West Bank, but also horrific human rights abuses against innocent civilians there and in Gaza. So simply put, the context of the concerns that are raised in this complaint matter greatly. We know that the right thing to do is to speak out with concerns when we reasonably believe that there's non-compliance with the law here in Canada. And with specific regard to this context, it can fairly be argued that there is a responsibility to speak out when those concerns relate to potential support for a military such as the IDF. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Shane. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm very grateful to you for clarifying the details of this case, just for making it so clear, letting us all know how it violates the CRA rules, and also for just giving the context specific to Israel and the importance of taking action. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more from you in the Q&A. So our next speaker of the evening is Rabbi David Mivasair. David Mivasair is served as a spiritual leader of synagogues in Pennsylvania and in Vancouver for nearly 25 years. He's also lived in Israel for 4 years and has visited personally. He's visited Palestine personally to stand in solidarity with Palestinians in their struggle on the ground several times in recent years. He lives in Hamilton and is an active member of Independent Jewish Voices. Alongside Khaled Mouammar, he has formally submitted a legal complaint to the CRA regarding the charitable status of the Canadian Zionist Cultural Association. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here and especially appreciate everyone else coming to listen, to learn, and then hopefully take action. So I was asked to speak actually about a different organization, one that's called the Jewish National Fund Canada. And I also was one of 4 people who filed a formal legal complaint with the CRA several years ago about the Jewish National Fund Canada. So I'd like to give some background about that and then talk a bit about the process of what happened with the CRA and the outcomes. And just, I want to step back even before that and just note that, as Bianca said in the very beginning, it's quite legitimate for there to be charitable organizations in Canada that raise money and send the money to Israel to pay for things like hospitals, orchestras, schools, children's playgrounds, artist colonies. There's many, animal welfare, protect nature. There's many completely legitimate charitable organizations that support programs in Israel. However, the Jewish National Fund, in addition to doing that, clearly, explicitly was established over 100 years ago to be a completely discriminatory organization. Its purpose was, in the early 1900s, at the beginning of the Zionist movement, to buy land in Palestine for the settlement of Jewish people. Jewish people wanted to go and live there. Other Jewish people helped them and began buying land in the early 1900s. And I would just say, scroll forward to 1947, 1948, Khaled talked about the massive displacement or expulsion of Palestinians from their own homes, their villages, their neighborhoods, their towns, including Khaled's own family and something like 750,000 other people. Those lands were declared to be belonging to absentee owners. And after a short while, like Khaled said, the state of Israel passed a law saying that those lands, because the owners were absentee, would become like state lands, and the Jewish National Fund was given the authority to control them. So just my own personal assessment, myself, I'd say, growing up Jewish, I thought that JNF was a wonderful thing. Jewish people all over the world, you know, pitching in their nickels and dimes and planting trees and buying land for Jewish people. But as I learned more and more, it became apparent to me that it wasn't only that the JNF was actively involved even after what I just described in 47, 48, 49. The JNF was very actively involved in removing Palestinians from their land and taking over hundreds of thousands of acres. I was recently in a place in the Galilee that used to be completely owned by Palestinians. Tens of thousands of acres belonged to Palestinian landowners and farmers and what have you. And in the 1960s, Israel had an explicit policy of Judaizing the Galilee. So like governments do, it condemned the lands for the public good, the same thing like Canada might do if it wants to build a dam or a baseball stadium for the public good, a highway. So Israel condemned tens of thousands of acres and gave it to the Jewish National Fund to develop. And similarly, in 1967, after Israel overran the West Bank, conquered it, drove people out once again, many of these people were refugees who took refuge there. The JNF was called in sometimes within a day to take over the lands and clear the lands. And one very well-known place is there were 3 villages very close to the green line that separated Israel proper from the Palestinian West Bank. 3 villages that were demolished within days without a shot being fired, no resistance. The Jewish National Fund brought in bulldozers and dynamited homes, completely leveled the villages. There were mosques, churches, schools, stores of thousands of people's homes. And one of those people was a young fellow named Ismail Zaid, who members of his family were killed in their own home by Israelis. Their home and their entire town was flattened. And then that entire place was leveled and made into a park called Canada Park by the Jewish National Fund. Some of the funding for Canada Park came from actual municipalities in Canada and provincial governments in Canada because of the image the Jewish National Fund had created, that it was such a green organization and it was helping the Jewish people, and frankly, because of the political influence that its advocates in Canada had. So today you can go to Canada Park, you can go on swings, you can have picnics, you can ride on bike trails. It's not far from Tel Aviv. And if you look closely, you can see rebars sticking up out of the ground. You can see cut stones, who are obviously parts of people's homes. So Ismail Zaid eventually moved to Canada. He became a doctor. He's living today in Halifax. He's a man in his 80s. And he filed complaints with the CRA about the Jewish National Fund violating Canadian tax law. Canadian tax law, like Shane said, stipulates that charitable donations may not be used in racially or ethnically discriminatory ways. There has to be a public good for it, and other very specific violations of Canadian tax law. So I'll just say that Ismail Zaid, as a Canadian citizen, for something like 40 years, filed complaints with the CRA. according to Canadian law, the CRA is not obliged to respond in any way. And about 4 years ago, Ismail and I and 2 other Canadians filed another complaint written very well by a lawyer. It was almost 85 pages of evidence taken right from the JNF website. It was like JNF material about what they're doing. And we met with the director of the compliance directorate within the charities division of the CRA in an office in Ottawa. And I have to say that was the end of it. We never heard a word, despite our inquiries. We sent more information. I sent frequent articles from the Israeli press about the corruption of the JNF, about how the Israeli government itself was debating whether the JNF should lose its charitable status in Israel. Never heard back from the CRA. And then, I'm just going to say roughly, about a year ago, we suddenly noticed that the JNF completely redid its website and positions itself now, instead of saying that it's a branch of the JNF from Israel operating in Canada, and instead of using basically a knockoff of the Israeli JNF logo, now they say they're a completely independent Canadian organization doing so many good things for Jewish people in Israel. And they have a brand new logo that doesn't look anything like that one used by the JNF in Israel. So in some ways, I have to say it's very frustrating. It actually is infuriating to think how a charitable organization in Canada can get away continuing to raise literally tens of millions of dollars with tax deductions. Wealthy people can make one donation of $1 million and take hundreds of thousands of dollars off their taxes. That's infuriating. The CRA did not put a stop to that, but it's very clear if you kind of look behind the scenes that the CRA called the Jewish National Fund of Canada on the carpet and told them, you have to restructure. You have to change the way you're doing business. Otherwise, we'll find you in violation and blah, 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 blah. So just scroll forward to right now. With enormous help from Shane, I really credit Shane completely with making this possible. Khaled and I have filed another complaint with the CRA about another organization that I actually never even heard of before, that I think it's a complete shell organization that actually has no members, no staff, does nothing but collect huge amount of money and ship it right to an organization that works hand in hand with the IDF. I don't know if we'll ever hear anything about that. The CRA is not obliged to tell us anything, and in fact, they're actually not allowed to disclose details. But hopefully we will see more than just a dodge and a continuation of business as usual, and that organization might get shut down. And just in closing, I'm not sure where the rest of our conversation will go tonight, but all of this is actually a political problem for us Canadian citizens. Israel has this impunity, and these organizations can do this only because we as citizens don't elect MPs who demand that it be shut down, right? This is completely in violation of Canadian law. So it's really up to us to make this change. And I think I'll leave it at that, and I hope we can talk about that more in the Q&A or sometime later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much for giving us this political education on the JNF, its work and the violation of Canadian tax laws, just for making that so concrete, and for highlighting also some of the discrepancies and hypocrisies. So thank you so much for sharing your work, for your activism, and also for moving forward with this new complaint. Looking very forward to hearing more from you during the Q&A. So our next speaker of the evening is Yves Engler. Yves is an author and activist based in Montreal. He's the author of 9 books on Canadian foreign policy, including the Black Book of Canadian Foreign Policy and Canada and Israel Building Apartheid. His latest is House of Mirrors, Justin Trudeau's Foreign Policy. And Yves is a fellow and board member with the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. Welcome, Yves.
Thanks, Bianca. Thanks everyone for coming out. I'm speaking from Montreal, land of the Jojage. And I think when we look at this question of the Canada Revenue Agency, it's my opinion that this is the most substantive Canadian contribution to Palestinian dispossession. And it's not new. David kind of mentioned that. This isn't something that just started yesterday. And I'm going to try to go at some macro level numbers and stuff like that. So first of all, there is more than 100 groups, registered charities, that are raising funds primarily for Israel. I don't know the exact number. It's very likely it's 200, possibly even more. The biggest one of those, the United Israel Appeal of Canada, raised $94 million in 2018. My estimate, having gone through a document with many of the groups of funding international projects, is there's more than $250 million raised for projects in Israel. It's a little bit complicated because these are macro numbers and you got to get into all the specific details, and I haven't done that full breakdown, but it's certainly $200 million, that is for sure. This isn't new. This has been going on since 1967 is when the Canada Revenue Agency brought in the sort of form of the registered charity model that allows people to give donations and get a tax receipt. So my estimate is it's about $5 billion that has been raised for projects, for initiatives in Israel since 1967. So that would put the Canadian tax payer on the hook for, I think it's realistic to estimate something in the range of $1.5 billion over the last 50 years or so. To get like a sense of this, right? When you look at like the charities today, it's a few $1 billion are raised by registered charities in Canada for international projects. I'm not sure exact number, something in the range of like at a kind of $5 billion kind of range. Possibly a little bit less than that. Israel makes up 0.13% of the world's population. So donations to Israel are, compared to the country's population, proportion of global population, is a minimum 40 times more than its proportion of the global population, and possibly 80 times more. Now, Israel is not a poor country. So most of these donations that are raised internationally, you know, they're going to, you know, Haiti or Bangladesh or Kenya. That's kind of what people would have in mind when they think of these international donations. Israel's GDP, in fact, is about equivalent to Canada's GDP per capita. So when you start looking at it like that, it makes it even more kind of politically questionable. In December, Charity Report, which is this mainstream charity-focused organization, put out a report about the 20 most important private foundations in Canada, their funding. And in that report, they found, and so these 20 private foundations represent 75% of all private foundation spending, according to this report. In that report, they found the 3 biggest recipients of private foundation funding in Canada were, number 1 was Technion, Israeli University, $89 million. Number 2 was the University of Toronto, $59 million. Number 3 was the Hesek Foundation, $45 million. So all the hospitals in Canada, all the universities in Canada, all of the symphonies, the on and on and on and on, the number 1 recipient is a university in Israel that happens to have a lot of ties to the IDF. The number 3 recipient is the Hesek Foundation. Well, the Hesek Foundation, I should say also, this report points out, before getting to the Hesek Foundation, this report points out that 0.02% of all this foundation funding went to Indigenous organizations, and 0.1% went to organizations run by people of color. So here you got like about 7% going to an Israeli university, 3.5%, 4% going to this Hesek Foundation, which, as I'll get to here, the Hesek Foundation supports Torontonians, Montrealers, New Yorkers to go and join the Israeli military. And basically, they provide scholarships for those who join the Israeli military, so-called lone soldiers that don't have family in Israel. The Hesek Foundation has had IDF generals on its board, a former head of Mossad on its board. And this should clearly, the Hesek Foundation violates the spirit of the Canada Revenue Agency rules around support for a foreign military, and probably violates the letter of the law. Yet it's the third biggest recipient of donations for private foundations. And to me, the basic Hesek Foundation is funded by Heather Reisman and Jerry Schwartz, who are the owner of Chapters Indigo and the head of Onyx financial firm. And to me, it's absolutely pathological that these two people would be paying to get Torontonians or New Yorkers to go join the Israeli military. That, in my opinion, is completely pathological. The fact that the Canadian taxpayer, the fact that basically they set up this foundation to not pay taxes in Canada so they can fund Torontonians and New Yorkers to go to the Israeli military is absolutely appalling. It's absolutely appalling that this is going on in Canada today. Unfortunately, the Hesek Foundation is just one of a number of groups. We've mentioned a couple that have supported the JNF, or they supported the IDF, the JNF, CZCA, the Lone Soldier Center in memory of Michael Levin, Canadian Magan David Odom for Israel, Halom Shem Canada, which is aid to disabled veterans of Israel. You can go down, you start going less clear cut. Even schools like in Toronto, Tannenbaum Chat, the biggest private school in the country, it organizes fundraisers for the Israeli military. It holds IDF days. You could make a case that they're supporting the Israeli military. It's more indirect. Same thing with Technion. As I mentioned, Technion receives tens and tens of millions of dollars annually from Canadian taxpayers. It's got all kinds of ties to the IDF. It's not just the IDF, which clearly violates CRA rules. West Bank settlements. It's a little bit less clear cut than IDF support, but West Bank settlements, by most understanding of it, also supporting settlements violate CRA rules. Yet we know that there's groups like Canadian Friends of Ariel University. Well, Ariel University is in a West Bank settlement. You have Canadian Friends of Yeshivat Har Etzion. That's also in a West Bank, a yeshiva in a West Bank settlement. You have the JNF. David talked a bit about the JNF, its role in that. You have groups like Christian Friends of Israeli Communities, which says on its website that it, quote, provides financial support to the Jews currently living in biblical Israel, the communities of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. So you have a whole bunch of groups, probably into the dozen, over a dozen, maybe into the dozens, that are pretty clearly violating CRA rules. That I think if you did a full audit of all the 200 or so Israel-focused charities, you would probably find that there's at least a dozen, and probably even a couple dozen, that are directly violating CRA rules around the IDF, around West Bank settlements, and also around being racist, which the CRA has a policy of opposing racism. So this is I think part of the context that we need to look at. I don't believe. I think that if you look at this, why would there be any charities? Why would the Canadian taxpayer be subsidizing any charity in Israel? That doesn't make sense to me. If how many charities in this country are subsidizing projects in Japan and in Sweden, right? Very few. You'll find that there's very few. And if you start getting into it, so one of the things I find kind of like funny reading through these registered charities, You have groups like Canadian Friends of the Israel Guide Dog Center for the Blind, Canadian Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel, Canadian Friends of the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra, Canadian Friends of Dental Volunteers for Israel, Canadian Association for Aviation and Space in Israel. Why is the Canadian taxpayer subsidizing that? If rich people want to give donations to these organizations, or if anyone wants to give donations to organizations, the Canadian taxpayer shouldn't be subsidizing that. But in fact, if you go further and you really think about this question, right? If one believes in the whole boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, it shouldn't just be that Canada doesn't subsidize these donations; they should be illegal. That is what sanctions would mean. Right? We have a history of that, even with regards to like Iran, where basically individuals couldn't basically have like bank accounts in Iran. The sanctions and Canada's sanctions weren't even like, full sanctions. So you can make a case that not only should Canada not be subsidizing these donations, which I think the case is overwhelming, but that these donations, you should be moving towards actually bringing in sanctions and making them illegal. I don't think we'll ever get to that far, because I think that Canada is so complicit in Palestinian dispossession that if it ever got close to that, Israel would make massive concessions to the Palestinians, and you're never going to have justice, but you have something approaching justice. So I think that in conclusion, we have to take this question of charities really seriously. If it's not now, when is it? This is pro-Palestinian movement, Palestinian solidarity movement, those who want a just Canadian foreign policy. This is a question we have to take on, right? If it's not today, if it's not in 6 months, 10 years from now, because it's just too important of a Canadian contribution to Palestinian dispossession. Now, the way to take it on, the immediate way of taking it on is, there's a macro discussion that needs to happen, and then there's the micro campaigning. And then we've begun some of that process. The complaint around the Jewish National Fund a few years ago led to some positive results. Not the full positive results, but a step in the right direction. They have this campaign, this complaint around the Canadian Zionist Cultural Association. It already has led to some positive result in the fact that they've had to go a bit more covert in their fundraising. They're no longer listed on the Israel Defense Forces website, so it's already had some positive impact. But this is a campaign. This is a broad campaign that needs to happen, and we need to go at these organizations one by one, find out which groups are already in violation of CRA rules, and begin going at them politically, legally, campaign-wise, and then broaden that circle out, and with time, I think, challenge the whole idea of registered charities in this country sending donations to Israel. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yves. Thank you for that very broad, big picture context, for all those facts. It's definitely pretty staggering to hear the extent and quantity of charitable donations. And thank you for reminding us as well about the work ahead that's required to campaign and confront these violations. So you can find out more about Yves' work at yvesengler.com, and we'll see you again in the Q&A. So our next speaker of the evening is Karen Rodman. Great pleasure to introduce Karen. Karen is a human rights advocate and the founder of Just Peace Advocates, one of today's sponsors. Karen was ordained as a United Church of Canada minister in 2015 and has served as a human rights volunteer observer in Palestine through the World Council of Churches. Karen is retired from a 3-decade career in senior management leadership with the Ontario Public Service. Welcome, Karen.
Thanks so much, Bianca, and what an honor to join with the other panelists, and so glad, and thanks to all of those who have been part of the webinar and who are listening in. It's my pleasure to share with you some of the actions specific to this complaint and campaign, but also some other actions that also are underway as well. Since the complaint was sent to the CRA about a week ago regarding the Canadian Zionist Cultural Association, there have been about 1,700 letters that have already been sent to senior officials at the Canadian Revenue Agency and the Minister of National Revenue. And the message has been clear, asking for an investigation and making it clear that taxpayers do not wish to illegally subsidize the Israeli military. We encourage you, if you haven't already done so, to send a letter and share, also for everyone to share that action with others via your social media and through other forums. And the letter can be sent as it's been written, or for those who wish, they can also choose to customize it. And that link is going to be put into the chat just as I'm speaking. The NDP revenue critic, Matthew Green, has been very supportive of this campaign, and he included several comments in the press release that went out to about 2,500 media. Not that many media have picked up on it just yet, but Matthew Green's point was that the Canadian Revenue Agency needs to investigate whether the Canadian Zionist Cultural Association is complying with its regulations for charity, and if an audit finds that it's breaking the rules, that it should revoke the Canadian Zionist Cultural Association's charitable status. And so we appreciate Matthew's clarity on this issue. I'd also encourage you to read and also share articles that have already been written. There was an article in Canadian Dimension by the two co-complainants, David and Khaled, around this complaint. We'll again put these links into the chat so that if you haven't seen the articles already, you can click on them and have them for reading after. There's also a couple of articles by Yves. One was regarding the complaint. It was in Rabble, just as we went out with the campaign, and a more recent article around the double standards on Muslim and Jewish charities. You can also keep up to date on the complaint and the associated campaign. We're housing that information on Just Peace Advocates website. So it's at www.justpeaceadvocates.ca. But again, we'll put a more specific link that goes directly to that campaign. So it will have the links for letter writing and other information, articles that are posted and that sort of thing. We've already mentioned the Stop the JNF campaign. And again, I think it'd be great to put that link back in so that people, if they're not familiar or haven't looked at it for a while, can look at that campaign and also the tools that are available to be writing to officials and the wonderful work that David has spoken about in terms of Ismail Zayed and Independent Jewish Voices. Certainly the four organizations that have worked on this campaign together that Bianca has already mentioned, again, to check out each and all of our websites. Just Peace Advocates and Foreign Policy Institute are probably taking the active role with this webinar, but equally important is the wonderful work from the Palestinian Canadian Congress and also Palestinian Jewish Unity in Montreal, who have been working with Shane and others as this has come together. I do want to just take us very quickly back to last October and the fact that the complaint was filed with Minister of Justice Lametti calling for an investigation into illegal Israeli military recruiting that's happening in Canada. That got immediate coverage on the front page of Le Devoir, and subsequently Lametti called the RCMP to undertake an investigation. There was a fair amount of media, a bit in Canada, some in other places, but thousands of letters have been been sent to Lameti and to the RCMP, and over 70 organizations have come together to endorse that campaign. And we did hold, and many of you would have attended a webinar back early in 2021 that provided details on that complaint and the associated campaign. In many ways, this particular complaint in regard to the Canadian Zionist Cultural Association ties directly to that work. And again, we'll put the link into the chat that lets you link into the materials from the broader campaign, and also to listen or re-listen to that webinar. It's still possible to continue to send letters to the RCMP and try to let them know we haven't forgot, that we're waiting for them to move forward or do work on their investigation. And even if you've sent 1 or 2 letters, it doesn't hurt to send another one, reminding them that they haven't got back to you. Those letters, again, can be customized or sent just as they're written. And again, we'll put that link in. The other thing that we haven't talked about recently so much, but is that there is a petition that is still alive on the parliamentary petition page, and it has been sponsored by NDP Member of Parliament Matthew Green. It's attracted over 7,700 signatures, and it is still open till August the 19th. Now, we know that likely the writ will draw up and an election will be called over the next few weeks. And of course, that means that petition won't get presented in Parliament, and the Liberals won't be required to respond. However, I would still encourage you to sign it. Let's see if we can get that up at least over 8,000, maybe even, because it shows very strong support for the request that Minister of Justice undertake a thorough investigation of any organizations or individuals that have recruited or facilitated recruiting for the Israeli military, and as warranted to lay charges in that regard. So even if we're starting back again on that post-election for the next session of Parliament, having those numbers will be important, and we continue to use the hashtag No Canadians for IDF. So again, we'll put that petition up into the link. So I encourage you to check out lots of other campaigns that are out there. There's one related to the Canadian Pension Plan and holding it accountable for the companies that it's invested in. We can put that link up as well. I'll also ask maybe we put the link up for the Canadian BDS Coalition, which is a group of about 25 groups from across Canada that have been working the last 5 years, particularly after the motion was presented in the House condemning BDS in 2016, that we've been working to do work together around boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And we will be working on a campaign you'll be hearing more about related to no Israeli arms for Canada, especially canceling not just the Elbit contract, but also the very large estimated $5 billion contract for armed surveillance drones, which has Israeli aerospace industries listed at the top of it. So just as I wrap up, expect to hear more, especially as an election is called, around messages and steps that can be taken to let our candidates know that we expect a strong principled approach regarding Palestine, and that I also will provide information from our organization, Just Peace Advocates, and we'll put it in the link around resources for those of us as defenders of Palestinian human rights. There's some pretty comprehensive legal and tactical guide information that you may find useful. So we will be asking organizations if they also want to join with the 4 groups that have been involved in the campaign to date to also endorse this. So that link also as a final link will be put back up into the chat, and we will use it to include other organizations that are endorsing this campaign and keep those organizations up to date, as well as, of course, individuals continuing to write the letters. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Karen. Thanks for sharing all those action items. People at home, there's tons of links that have been put in. Thank you for sharing all the campaigns and also for reminding us about the importance of this upcoming election in terms of making some change and generating some waves. And of course, we encourage audience members to get involved. And just thank you, Karen, for all of your incredible, inspiring activism. You can find out more about Karen's work at justpeaceadvocates.ca. Before we move on to the next portion of our evening, I just want to mention again that you can donate to the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute at foreignpolicy.ca. We are reliant on donors to continue doing this critical work, and maybe in this particular case, hopefully save us all some unjustifiable tax dollars while we're at it. So that's foreignpolicy.ca/donate. So thanks again to our presenters for those incredible presentations. So clear, so much passion. There's so much to act on. Thank you to the audience members who have posted your questions. You can continue to do that in the Q&A box and can direct them to all or one of the panelists. And we have a couple of questions that have already come in. So this question is directed at Shane. Is the CRA obliged to uphold Article 1 of the 4th Geneva Convention and Canada's Geneva Conventions Act? Shane.
Great, thanks for the questions. So the CRA isn't an enforcement body when it comes to international law. However, the CRA is supposed to consider public policy reasons and Canadian public policy when making determinations on the activities of charities and whether or not those activities are in compliance with Canadian law. In the complaint that was filed regarding the CZCA, we did mention international law. We did mention the Geneva Convention, if I'm not mistaken. And we do talk about how those are pressing and substantial concerns that the CRA is to consider when making decisions in matters such as this. So again, it's not ultimately an enforcement body for international law, but those are factors that it's supposed to take into consideration.
Thank you, Shane. The next question is quite specific and is for Khaled, which is what happened to the town of Safuria? Oh, you are still muted.
Yeah, the town of Safuria was completely destroyed, and in part of its lands, a Jewish colony was created. The rest of its lands are sometimes used, for farming purposes by that colony. But as I stated, the descendants of that town, many of them who sought refuge in Nazareth, cannot even enter that area. There's a British guy by the name of Jonathan Cook who conducts guided tours of places like Safuria. He takes people and walks around that area, and some of the descendants of the village sometimes go on those tours, but it's really very frustrating for them not to be able to even enter into the compound, which is enclosed and isolated from them. So as I said, that town was destroyed because most of its inhabitants were Muslims, but Nazareth was saved from destruction and expulsion because most of its inhabitants were Christians, and most of them were really from the Greek Orthodox sect to which I belong. And unfortunately, this is another aspect showing how apartheid tries also to satisfy the Christian West, because they play on the fear of Islam and Muslims, and it's not that they are treating the Christian Palestinians better, but they project that image.
Thank you, Khaled. The next question I think is for all panelists, which is, why has the CRA been turning a blind eye to pro-apartheid Israeli funding? Is it the federal government applying pressure to the CRA not to take action?
That's yeah. Oh, Yves, you go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'll speak maybe at the macro political level. I think that it's partly, I mean, it's political, of course, right? It flows from a anti-Palestinian political culture that we have in this country. That's not new. That's, long-standing. Been existing for more than a century. It didn't start with Stephen Harper. It's has many facets to it. It's actually not correct to say that they haven't taken action. In 2019, Beth Oloth charitable organization lost its charitable status. They lost their charitable status for a series of reasons. It was stated they lost their charitable status in part because they supported the IDF, in part because they supported West Bank settlements, and in part because they were a complete financial train wreck. They went from basically raising nothing in 2011, like a couple $1,000s, to raising $61 million, $61 million by 2017. They had no website. I think they had 2 board members, and they had, I think their office was like someone's house. So it was a totally financially, the transparency question was completely off the chart. In the late 90s, early 2000s, a series of at least 4 different Israel-focused organizations lost their charitable status. The Canadian Magen David Adom, which I believe is sort of like the Red Cross, they lost their charitable status. They've gotten it back subsequently, but they lost it for quite a while because they were providing ambulances to the IDF. And they were supporting West Bank settlements. They were entrenching settlements. There was another group that lost their charitable status because they had very dubious financial practices. And then there was a third, the one in the 90s that was supporting settlements. There was a series of articles in the mid 90s that talked about some of this, like in the Toronto Star, like front page of the Toronto Star, that talked about this, and there was sort of got sort of politically sensitive amidst the Oslo kind of negotiations. In the case of the JNF, the JNF is a very powerful organization, right? I mean, most Canadian prime ministers have spoken at JNF events. So the JNF was, politically speaking, it's the second most powerful of the pro-Zionist Jewish organizations. Of course, the most powerful are the federations, the United Jewish Appeal of Toronto, Federation, CJA, Montreal, etc. But after that, JNF is very powerful. So what happened with the JNF, in my opinion, I mean, it wasn't a full victory. The JNF should have lost its charitable status. It's clearly violating CRA rules in a whole bunch of different ways, but it was a partial victory because of that complaint, because of the campaigning that, as I mentioned, goes back decades, but in the more recent form was, the Independent Jewish Voices spearheaded that there's been protests at JNF fundraisers, etc. So I think that it's also part of it, I think, is that there hasn't been pressure brought. Like the Hessek Foundation, I'm not sure about this. I say this somewhat tentatively, but in 2010 or thereabouts, there was a whole bunch of campaigning. There was a boycott of chapters in Indigo because Heather Reisman and Jerry Schwartz were supporting through Hessek, were supporting lone soldiers. I don't believe there was ever a formal complaint. So there were like rallies. I mean, there was a picket here in Montreal where we're outside of Chapters Indigo, every Friday for, I think, a couple of years even. There was all kinds of campaign, but I don't think there was ever a formal complaint to the Canada Revenue Agency around Hessek Foundation's charitable status. I'm not sure. It's possible that they only got their charitable status later on. I'm not sure about that, but they've had it for at least since 2014, probably before that. I think they probably had it since, when it's established in 2005. And so the Palestinian Solidarity Movement has done a very poor job. Am I muted?
Now you're back.
How much did I get muted? Do you know what?
Just a little.
Oh, just a little. Yeah. So the Palestinian Solidarity Movement hasn't gone at this charitable issue in a formal way, with the exception of the JNF challenge. The CZCA is my understanding, the only second challenge. There needs to be a compiling of all of the Israel-focused charities. First step. Second step, we need to know how much money they are all raising. Third step, we need to search each one of them and find out, find out like what they're doing, right? And the ones that it doesn't take that long to punch their names into Google and have a sense of whether it's supporting a West Bank, a settlement in the West Bank, or if it's a totally fanatical yeshiva or rabbi or whatever. That kind of stuff is not that difficult to find out. There's stories about this, like I said, in the Toronto Star and the Ottawa Citizen in the 90s that detail some of this, and begin to systematically investigate these organizations and then start pursuing them, be it pursuing them for IDF, support for IDF, West Bank settlements because they're racist or because their finances are a mess, right? We need to challenge them across the board. Sorry, that was a little long.
If I can just jump in really quick, Bianca, very quick, with just one more example. There's absolutely, I think, anti-Palestinian sentiment that's allowing activities like this to continue. But as Yves mentioned, it's not unheard of for the Canadian government to actually take action when complaints are filed. And it's not unheard of for the courts as well to take action when complaints are filed. There's a decision, for example, from 2002 called Canadian Magen David Odom for Israel versus Canada. And that was heard before the Federal Court of Appeal, and it involved the revocation of an organization's charitable status because for a number of reasons, but part of it had to do with charitable donations being used by the IDF. For example, an ambulance, right? Materials were being sent to Israel and the Israeli military was making use of them. And the Canada Revenue Agency found that, no, that's in violation of CRA policy. We're going to revoke your status. And the Federal Court of Appeal upheld that. So it's not unheard of for action to be taken, but it requires people to do the research that's necessary and for the community at large to come around and support those initiatives when they come forward, because it's one thing to bring a legal complaint, but it's another thing to have mass public backing of it, which is really what gives its strength at the end of the day.
Thank you, Shane. Does anyone else want to jump in? All right, so the next question that we have here is a little bit more action oriented. And someone is asking, now that you've, how can what you have discussed this evening tie into the upcoming federal elections? What does this have to do with the election?
I don't think it has anything to do with the federal election. And I think it's a mistake to try to bring this into the federal election. I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done in consciousness raising, in campaigning to bring this in, try to bring this into the federal election. And I think we make strategic errors regularly by not just sort of say, hey, election's coming, let's start discussing this subject in the election. I think Palestine should be part of the election, and I think we should hold, I've suggested before, I've been involved in a campaign like this around Haiti. I think the Palestinian Solidarity Movement should choose 2 ridings in the country that are strategically sensible ridings and have hard Palestine campaigns in those ridings and try to defeat 1 or 2 liberal MPs because of this government's horridly anti-Palestinian policies. So I think that is something that we should do, and maybe it should only be 1 riding. I think it's a big error to try to, like, oh, we're going to bring Palestine to every riding across the country. if we defeated one Liberal MP because of the government's anti-Palestinian policy, that would have substantive political reverberations. And there is so many elements to the Trudeau government's anti-Palestinian policy that we do not, this was just one more, this is a longstanding one, this is one more, and we need to do all kinds of work on this issue, but this is not the issue that should be part of an election campaign around Palestine. Their open support for the destruction of Gaza, their voting record at the UN, on and on. There's so many different examples. But I think the Palestinian Solidarity Movement needs to be very strategic. One riding, two ridings, no more. Flood those ridings with messages about their anti-Palestinian policy. Have rallies. If we're well enough organized, even have people call people in the riding, or put leaflets in every single house, every single mailbox in the riding. Put up thousands of posters in the riding around anti-Palestinian policies. Choose the riding, or maybe two ridings strategically, in the sense that if they have if the Liberals won by a small margin, if they have large Arab or Muslim populations, other sort of strategic questions like that, if we have a lot of activists that are close to that riding, on and on and on. But it's a big mistake to try to bring everything into an election, stay as narrow as possible. If we had an impact on one Liberal MP losing because of Palestine, that would be a major development for Palestine solidarity.
Are there any other thoughts on that? David?
Yeah, so I want to follow up exactly on what Yves said right now. There is a campaign that's been developing over the last month because we're anticipating a federal election. So I just want to mention two, and specifically invite anyone to personally be in touch with me. I'd like to engage you in this. So there's one thing happening that'll be launched very soon. That's called Vote Palestine, and it's going to have a website that's votepalestine.ca, and it does have an outreach all across the country, everywhere, to try to just raise the profile of Palestine as an issue. In parallel with that, a number of us, mostly Palestinian organizations, are doing very clear research, like a scorecard of the members of parliament right now, and they're going to broaden the scorecard to certain candidates and actually try to do what Yves just said, to actually target a very small number, a very small handful. He said one or two, maybe we'll do three, maybe four, but try to tip the balance in those swing ridings. It could go one way or the other. It's very close. Can we make the difference by making Palestine, and even more broadly, human rights in general, an issue? And I would say, even if we don't tip the balance and get incumbent voted out, that would be a story. The fact that that's an issue and what will happen. So again, I don't want to get too much into it, but if anyone listening wants to actually be involved in doing what Yves just said, contact me, contact Yves. You could contact anybody here. Everybody knows how to get through to me. And I will do everything I can to draw you into that and make this happen on the ground in a very small handful of critical swing ridings where the issue of Palestine could come to the fore.
Thank you.
You know what? I'm sorry, Bianca, you said before, did anybody else want to talk about that question, whether politics is involved in the CRA doing nothing? And I put my hand up, but I didn't speak up quickly enough.
Oh.
But, so I just want to add, I think I read this from something that Yves wrote, but the lobbying group, the group of lobbyists in Canada who have the most contact with members of parliament and federal officials, just take a guess. Is it mining? Is it the oil industry? Is it forestry? It's the Israel lobby, CIJA and its allies. The number one contact with our MPs and our appointed, people in different bureaucracies and ministries and so on. So the question actually sounds like a bit of a naive question, or maybe just a rhetorical question. Of course, that's what's behind this. And I don't know if it's been said in this in this discussion yet, but not long ago, just a few years ago, the whistle was blown on charities that were like funneling money to terrorist groups, and 75% of the groups shut down by the CRA were Islamic associated groups. Some of them were simply like giving money to a hospital in Gaza, where in the last election, the people democratically elected Hamas. And Hamas is on the list as a terrorist group. So an Islamic organization in Canada giving money to a hospital in Gaza is associating with terrorists. So I'm just saying the CRA uses its power to shut things down, I think completely when it's politically expedient, and then doesn't when it's not. And none of this is out front. I'll just say one more thing. I'm just gonna like indulge myself in saying this. I received a fundraising appeal today for the Israeli Scouts, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts. Oh, they wanna buy high-speed internet and air conditioners and furnish 20 apartments for the lone soldiers. These very people who grew up in Canada or the US or maybe Russia or wherever they came from, who joined the Israeli army, they go to Israel, they don't have parents there. So the Israeli Scout organization is raising money to provide them with accommodations. So I'm just saying that kind of like fly under the radar. If you give money to the Israeli Scout organization for the lone soldier program, is the CRA going to catch that? So again, I would go back to what Yves was saying about doing research. And I'd also say there's enough of us on this call that if 10 of us would say to Yves, hey, I'll help with that research. You organize it. I'll spend a few hours on the internet looking up the details. David said something about the Israeli Scout organization. I'll look into that one. Where else should we look? I'm saying that we could actually use this as an opportunity to organize, to dig into like a database that's already available from the CRA, that it's public information, but somebody's got to like mine it and find out what does it all mean and who's who and what's what.
I think the main problem we're facing is that the politics in this country is pro-Israeli. When we have a prime minister who says, publicly, speaking at the anti-Semitism summit, that Canada and Israel share democratic values, is actually clearing up Israel of all its crimes. When we have a Minister of Foreign Affairs like Mark Garneau saying the label of apartheid is not applicable in the case of Israel, the CRA reflects that mentality, because they basically say, Israel is like us, a democratic country. So these people are attacking Israel, donations to Israeli groups must be people who are ignorant or full of hatred of Jews, So starting at the top, Trudeau for some reason, well, I don't think it's only Trudeau, because it started with Pearson, who was the central player in the partition plan, which was passed by the UN in 1947. It was Lester Pearson, and the draft of that plan was done by a Supreme Court of Justice, Ivan Rand. And we now have another Minister of Justice who is the advisor of Trudeau, who is also a pro-Israeli. And that's why since Pearson's time, Canada was considered the Balfour, the Canadian Balfour, of Zionism and Israel. And until that mentality changes, which can only come through defeats and as was mentioned in a parliamentary riding, I don't think our politicians are going to change their minds. And the CRA will not therefore follow the laws the same way that the liquor board tried to label wines from the settlements as not Israel, but the government stopped them and bypassed the decision of the liquor board.
Thank you, Khaled. So we only have time for one more question. We have a question from someone about what kinds of initiatives we should take. We've already kind of delved into that a little bit, but I think this could be a nice opportunity for panelists to just give a final word on this question, which is please outline what you think the supporters of Palestinian freedom and equality should be doing. I don't know if folks have anything to add. I know you have already given quite a few examples, but if there's anything else or any highlights, let us know.
Don't everybody jump in at once here. I want to say in all sincerity, actually do everything we can. And I think it also depends on who you are. And what I mean is, if you're an artist, maybe do art. If you're a musician, do music. If you're like some incredible like data analyst person, you know, help us figure out where all the money's going, where's it coming from, you know. I happen to be a Jewish person, you know, my whole life, and I've lived in Israel and I know about it, and I'm a rabbi, and I feel like I can speak from that place into this space, you know. So I don't mean to be glib or flippant in any way, but I would actually turn that question around and say, what can you do? You know, it happens that I live in a riding that elected Matthew Green. So I'm the guy who can pick up the phone and call, hey, Matthew, you know, could we put something from you in this press release? If I lived in a riding that was always conservative all the time, I don't think I would get too involved with federal electoral politics in my riding, but I might look for a riding like, you know, next door or next door to the one next door, where I might be able to tip the balance if there's going to be an election. Or, you know, I have a long list. If you're a member of a church or a mosque or anything, if you're in a labor union, if you're on a soccer team, you know, there's so many things that every single person can do. If you're, you know, you get my point.
Thank you, David.
I'll maybe just say, you know, I'm relatively new to Palestinian solidarity activism compared to my fellow panelists here. But I would say, you know, don't be shy and reach out to people who have been involved, you know, for quite a while in this, and learn from them. And don't feel as though you need to reinvent the wheel, right? There's many structures and projects that are already well underway that people can contribute to if they're unsure about exactly what they can do. The other thing I would suggest as well, I'd echo everything that David said, but I'd also say, please try to inject conversations about Palestine and Israel into your daily relationships, right? It doesn't have to be something that you talk about every single second, because that may push someone away, as you know, any issue would, right? But make it a normal topic of conversation. Make it something that people feel engaged about and want to talk about, and break down the taboo around discussing it, right? And that begins by, you know, sharing information that you've learned, and trying to do so on a regular basis to let people know that, you know, this is something that should be talked about, is worthwhile talking about. And it's something that once they understand that it's something that's important to you and they can understand the rationale behind it, hopefully they'll be motivated to not only talk about it as well, but also to look into taking action, as David mentioned.
All right, so it is actually past 8:32, so it really is time for us to wrap up today. I can't thank our panelists enough for such a lively, important, critical, and you know, like it's been a long time coming, this discussion, and I hope that this is something that we continue to discuss and that takes up more and more space. As many of you have said, it's just too important not to be something that we're discussing. Canada is too implicated, and there's just too much support in this very specific way. So let's get active. Let's do it in all of the ways that we're able to. You know, I think some good advice I've heard in the past about how to make a difference is to stop being an individual to a certain extent, right? So to join with and gather with others who are doing this work. I don't know any activists who aren't looking for more volunteers. So just a few announcements before we depart. Again, if you like events like these, please do consider making a donation to the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. We have been working pretty relentlessly to build this hub of critical foreign policy, and we're reliant on you to keep doing this work. So that's foreignpolicy.ca/donate. And as has been mentioned many times today, one of the best ways to help protect Palestinians from Israeli violence is by insisting that our government apply its own laws with respect to charities in this particular case. This is something we can do here in Canada. It's very, very direct. We can hold our own government to account. So please do take 1 minute to send this letter to the Minister of National Revenue and the Canadian Revenue Agency officials. It's just one click, a very powerful tool. Already 1,700 people have taken action on this, and the post and link is in the chat. So it's been a tremendous event. I have learned so much. I'm feeling very revved up to get even more active on this issue. It feels very, very in our faces. I want to just really thank our co-organizers, the Just Peace Advocates, PAJU, and the Palestinian Canadian Congress. And thank you again to our incredible panelists, Shane, Khaled, David, Karen, and Yves. It's been a terrific night. And that's it for our program today. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.